So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our two speakers. So we have Cynthia Bouthot from Space Commerce Matters. She's the president of Space Commerce Matters. And also Jonathan Volk, who's the director of commercialization strategies at Space Commerce Matters. And just a little bit of a background, Jonathan and I had interacted in the past. About 2 years ago, I think it was, Jonathan, we did some work on the International Space Station to really understand some fundamental scientific properties that would help to solve some challenges here on Earth, and had a great experience with that. So we've sort of picked up that conversation again recently, specifically around addressing some of the major sustainability challenges that we're facing on Earth and really being able to leverage science in space. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Cynthia. I think is going to take the lead. So if you want to grab the presentation here, Cynthia,
sure.
You can.
Thank you. Thanks, David. And can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And thank you so much for inviting us to speak here at your second live event. I already can see there's quite a few folks like David Alexander who were commenting on the music from all of our past work in Houston. So we're going to just sort of go through these slides pretty quickly at the beginning because I think this audience is probably pretty savvy on some of the reasons why we should be caring about space here on Earth, and hopefully spend most of our time talking about these big challenges and sustainability issues, as you mentioned, David. So next slide, Jonathan. And again, I think this community, the folks here on the call, understand that when we talk about space, we're really talking about a continuum where we start with low Earth orbit, which is that band about 250 miles above us where the International Space Station travels and where most of our satellites operate. We are hearing lots of activity now from space agencies, from NASA, from ESA, from JAXA, from pretty much every space agency on the planet in terms of their plans for the moon, Mars, and beyond. And that's why there's been such a big push for the commercialization of low Earth orbit so that governments can get out of that and spend their resources on the moon, Mars, and beyond. And that in and of itself is leading to lots of opportunity for commercial activity, as well as solving these big problems like sustainability in low Earth orbit by us, commercial organizations. Next slide. We're seeing lots of investment trends. So as we see reusable rockets and advances in technology, we're seeing public sector spend on spaceports and previously on the Space Force. Those are all adding to the activity and the commercial growth that we're seeing. And now we're hearing about, satellite internet with SpaceX and Bezos and others. Next slide. But what we're mostly hearing about are these really exciting new assets and inspiring the next generation. So we're all understanding what SpaceX is doing with its reusable stage 1 part of the rocket. Airbus, I believe Bill Corley is here. All of the activity that's happening with their new external platform, Bartolomeo, providing lots of activity that we'll actually talk about at the end during our sustainability examples. Virgin Orbit, Sierra Nevada, Boeing, Axiom, all providing commercial access back to space in different types of ways. Next slide. And I believe we also have the CEO of SpaceForge on this call as well. And what we're also seeing is lots of new investment in manufacturing. So SpaceForge building a reusable manufacturing satellite, which is really going to change the game on what we're able to do in terms of moving from research and development only on the ISS pretty much to all of these new types of platforms that are going to provide a cadence supporting in LEO manufacturing, bringing it back down to Earth, and really having business cases that close around that. So SpaceForge is doing tremendous work. ESA's Space Rider. We just heard that Varda Space raised $9 million for their manufacturing, their factories in space. There's ultimately lots of activity leading towards these new developments. Next slide. So what I just talked about was pretty much the supply side of space. It's the rockets, it's the platforms. But what we focus on is, what about the demand? And why do you care about space on the demand side? And lots of these items are really about saving our Earth with sustainability and climate change and, you know, better crop production and better water management. Some of the things that the TCC is already talking about. We're seeing companies, and we'll give you examples of drug delivery systems, crop science, and then the remote sensing and satellite technologies. All of this activity is currently taking place, and it's taking place in low Earth orbit for benefit back here on Earth. Next slide. And what we're also seeing is there's different types of benefit. There's economic benefit, there's innovation science, and humankind social. And when we were at the International Space Station National Lab prior to coming to Space Commerce Matters, we actually had to come up with ways to measure this tangibly and then report back to NASA and report back to Congress. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see examples of that. So when I started with the ISS National Lab in 2011, there were 0 commercial companies using space or using the ISS for their own purposes terrestrially. Sure, there were collaborations with NASA on some of those joint initiatives. But when we started in 2011, you could not beg, borrow, or steal a commercial customer to do anything in space because they did not think it was relevant to them. And when I left in 2018 to start Space Commerce Matters, over 55% of the users of the ISS National Lab were commercial companies. We had generated more than $160 million of them actually paying for that activity, paying service providers like Ice Cubes or NanoRacks or others that actually, you know, sort of support those services. And we had generated more than $34 million on these third-party sponsored programs. That's the real underpinning of these open innovation competition aimed at sustainability and at climate change. And we think it's a great model, especially with some of the strategic challenges that we're seeing TCC already put into place. And then we had also looked at some of these broader impacts of incremental revenue and total addressable time to market. Next slide, Jonathan. These are just some of the companies doing these types of activities. And again, this is not going to low Earth orbit to support the NASA exploration mission. It's going to low Earth orbit to support these companies and their product development life cycles. So drug delivery and discovery. Looking at consumer products and better packaging and better materials, looking at all of the VR, the virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence. And then ultimately, the thing I think we all really are the most excited about is look at all the things that you can do under sustainability. You can look at the effects of climate change, of CO2 sequestration, of ocean health, of water efficiency, of energy, and of mobility. Next slide. And then last, before I hand it over to Jonathan, you know, when we talk about going to low Earth orbit, you know, why technically would we go? And it's really these 3 reasons. It's because microgravity exists, which leads to a whole range of phenomena that you cannot recreate here on Earth. And Jonathan's going to give those examples. Extreme conditions, the atomic oxygen, the heat and cold cycling, the debris impact, the radiation, the things that you're going to be able to experience, you know, externally on the Bartolomeo platform, as an example, what may take decades to degrade here on Earth could take weeks or months to degrade in low Earth orbit. And then ultimately the vantage point, looking at the remote sensing and Earth observation examples. And so over to you, Jonathan, to sort of bring us through some of the concrete examples of these organizations that have done these types of activities.
Sure. Thanks, Cynthia. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to go through a handful of actual flight projects. These are projects that have flown to LEO or are currently up there. And there's going to be kind of a common theme throughout these. In the first handful of examples I'm going to show really relate to that microgravity phenomena and really kind of the scientific reasoning for a lot of these projects is you really want to be able to isolate non-gravitational forces. Gravity gets in the way of a lot of things down here on the ground. These non-gravitational forces are present, like surface forces, they're present on the ground in your processing, your manufacturing, but you really can't study them because they're hard to isolate because gravity gets in the way. So a lot of these examples is really going to be these companies or these researchers wanted to isolate those non-gravitational forces that are part of their process so they can get a better understanding of their entire process and take that knowledge and apply it to their processing and their manufacturing on the ground. So the first example is Merck Pharmaceuticals. They wanted to crystallize a better protein with fewer defects. They want to learn about what causes defects in protein crystallization. So they did actually a series of experiments in Leo. And actually a nice application of this is they took some of that knowledge and applied that to their manufacturing of the cancer drug Keytruda. Some of you might have heard of it, or you might have seen advertisements for it recently. So they were actually able to take the knowledge directly from their ISS work and apply that to their manufacturing of the Keytruda drug.
And it's actually very relevant to what we're hearing on COVID vaccines now, because it's a large biologic, which is painful to deliver into the body, and it typically has to be delivered in a hospital setting. So what they did is they looked at the delivery mechanism of how does it travel less painfully into the body, and how can it be administered in a home care setting instead of going to the hospital. So I don't know how many of you have gotten your Pfizer or your Moderna vaccines, but your arm is definitely sore after you get those vaccines, and this is something similar.
Great. Yeah, another pharma example is Eli Lilly, lyophilization, freeze drying drugs for storage and also for delivery to remote areas, being able to extend the performance of the drug while it's frozen. So the lyophilization process, Eli Lilly wanted to see how gravity impacts that process, or how the lack of gravity impacts that process, so they can take that knowledge and apply it to their ground-based lyophilization processing. So, and
again, the point there, Jonathan, is that right now, you have to freeze dry a lot of drugs to transport it to, across the world. And what happens when you are able to do more of this with their various therapies, where you don't have to use refrigeration? So that really, in their mind, was looking at increased access to therapies in parts of the world that weren't getting these therapies right now.
And also Eli Lilly did a number of experiments. This one was on lyophilization, but they did some other ones as well with drug delivery and crystallization. So, and like with Merck, we're seeing a lot of companies that are kind of frequent flyers. They want to utilize the Leo phenomena to kind of follow up on what they've done already. So that's really nice to see. And another example of that is Budweiser. They actually did a series of experiments of seed germination for barley. They wanted to look at unique proprietary barley strains to see how they would germinate in microgravity. That might give them some insight into growing processes down here on the ground. And they've continued to do some follow-on work. Now they're also looking at the malting process and eventually the fermentation. So they're one of those frequent flyers where they're building up what they've already learned in the Leo environment, want to do subsequent experiments. So we're really happy to see that. Another example of a frequent flyer is Procter and Gamble. A big problem in the consumer product industry is shelf life. They want to extend shelf life of their household products, cleansers, detergents, in some cases food as well. So a big contributor to phase separation is sedimentation, but there's other reasons that cause that. But sedimentation is what drives phase separation on the ground. So they really want to find out what else causes phase separation. What are those non-gravitational forces that contribute to that problem? So they did a number of experiments in microgravity on this problem. They actually developed 2 patents from the data that came from their flight experiments. So again, another example of a frequent flyer really doing something, tangible results, those patents that can help them increase their shelf life and the stability of their products, which obviously many consumers all across the world utilize. Interesting one related to energy. Delta Faucet wanted to improve their efficiency of their shower head. They wanted to be able to make less water feel like more. They really wanted to study the droplet formation out of their shower head, what surface forces drive that droplet formation out of the shower head, so they can eventually design a shower head that is more water efficient, uses less water, but you get that same feeling of taking a full shower. And also, if you're taking a hot shower, how do you conserve more energy utilizing less heat during that shower? So that's, again, another example of utilizing the understanding what non-gravitational forces drive that droplet formation process to better understand, so you can make a more efficient shower head on the ground. Another energy one is Goodyear tire. They wanted to look at how silica forms in microgravity, because maybe they could develop or learn ways to develop a more unique microstructure of silica. And obviously silica goes into making rubber, and rubber goes into tires, obviously. And the impact there is if you can, on the small level, the molecular level, the silica level, that'll eventually lead to a tire that's better designed, more fuel efficient, potentially safer, reduced pollution. So there's a lot of significant downstream impact by studying this initial phenomenon on a molecular level and how that can apply to an end user product. And this one, David, if you want to talk about it, you're welcome to. I know you lived it hands-on, so we'll turn it over to you briefly for your project, if you don't mind.
Thank you. I like that. Well, actually, we have one of our scientists who worked this. Elisa Gingers is on the call, but I won't pass over to you, Alicia. So this was an interesting one. We wanted to probe the corrosion that goes on in the oil field in pipelines under biofilms, and wanted to look at the impact of the film thickness, the biofilm thickness, and then the speciation. And there's some elements of that we could not tease those variables apart on Earth. So we leveraged some science on the International Space Station to do exactly that. We got some interesting results, which led us in a completely different direction and thinking around what's important for biofilms, and especially the build of biofilms and ultimately the corrosion there. So it was an excellent experience and a really nice piece of work.
Great. Yeah, we enjoy working with you on that. So just two more quick examples, not to neglect the other phenomena, but one example of an external environment test. Georgia Tech looked at novel photovoltaic cells. They wanted to test it in the space environment to really see if it could be a superior technology for use both in space, but also extreme Earth-based markets, which could lead to cleaner energy. And then the last example, which will be a nice transition in our sustainability portion, is we work with Target. They have a real problem with cotton sustainability. It takes a lot of water to make a cotton t-shirt. In fact, 700 gallons of water is the number that they gave us to make one cotton t-shirt. So it's obviously a big problem. So they really wanted to look at space as a way to find solutions to cotton sustainability. How do you grow more sustainable cotton? How do you manage that problem? So this is a couple of years ago. We had about, I think, 70 plus submissions to this competition. We actually ended up awarding 3 different proposals that flew to ISS to investigate their research. One involved plant growth, one involved water filtration, and one involved remote sensing to monitoring to get crop data for farmers. So that was a nice example of a large sponsored program focused on sustainability that really kind of cut across many different areas of research.
And I just want to add, because I was looking at the TCC strategic challenges, and it looked like you guys looked at desalination as one of your areas, along with all of the other water efficiency. And it was interesting because we were literally having a brainstorming call, and we were talking about the effects of chlorine on bathing suits, because apparently Target is the #1 seller of bathing suits on the planet. And it was during that call that we talked about the effects of water and on these types of processes. And we started the discussion with what happens if you could, water crops with salt water. And from there, we went to this cotton sustainability challenge. So I think there's some really interesting themes that align with some of the things we've seen already conducted in low Earth orbit with the types of strategic challenges that TCC is thinking about. And that brings us to, how can you as a community, the TCC and members, engage in what we're talking about here? And we came up with a couple of different ideas. One is, taking what you already do with your partnerships and collaborations and your strategic challenges, and looking at the cross-functional activity in Houston's Houston's primary industries. So if you go to the next slide, you know, in talking with David, you know, as part of some of the things that are of interest and focus with you all, we were really examining the oil and gas industry, the life science and medicine community, the aerospace, the renewable energy, and the carbon capture activities that are taking place. And, you know, with the example customers or companies that are listed here that focus in those areas. And one of the things that we have found to be very effective is when you look at these industries that are very strong in a geographic area and you look at the cross-functional overlap. So how do you use space to deal with oil and gas? How do you use space to deal with life science and medicine, you know, and renewable energy and carbon capture? And what we have are very specific LEO propositions where potentially you could use your infrastructure of TCC to put together some of these challenges focused on these cross-functional efforts. So Jonathan, why don't you take us through some of these propositions for each of those industry sectors?
Sure. So as you can see, really they take into account all three phenomena of LEO. So at oil and gas, you're looking at separations, you're looking at interfacial studies, fluid flow, multi-phase flow. And also on the remote sensing side, being able to track oil spills or looking at for mining data, looking at energy emissions. So again, you're combining multiple LEO propositions. On the life science side, microgravity is a great environment to accelerate disease progression. We talked about protein crystals. The aerospace side is pretty obvious for testing and developing new materials for use in space. On the energy side, again, the remote sensing side, looking at energy emissions, pollution, and also testing carbon capture processes, other energy processes in that extreme environment, that closed system that can be used for development or for implementation on the ground.
Yeah, and then next slide. And in addition to sort of looking at the cross-functional overlap of space with different industries, one of the other thing that we have seen be really successful in generating activity in low Earth orbit is really engaging the startup community. So when you looked originally at that, you know, that chart where we showed 34 million on these third-party sponsored programs, these are examples of them. And one of the big ones is the Boeing Mass Challenge partnership. So, you know, we had worked with Boeing for 10 years, 8 years on these accelerator competitions, looking at, you know, how can a startup use low Earth orbit in their development cycle. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen some of the results of these Mass Challenge projects. Boeing does a great job in sort of promoting and supporting these companies as they spin out these activities. And if you go to the next slide, you know, when we look at the entrepreneurship and startup community in Houston, you guys are extremely rich. And I'm sorry to say that we don't have the Rice Space Institute, especially since David Alexander has been on the call. But, you know, there's so many different organizations, either standalone or part of universities, or like with Shell, the Game Changer program that you guys have. These are really great existing channels that you can start to incorporate some of these space-based activities as they relate to some of the more traditional terrestrial areas. So to us, that's a really good example of how you know, can engage more in low Earth orbit in some of these areas starting right away. And if you go to the next slide, the next big area really directly relates to what the topic of this discussion is all about. And what we have done is created a coalition called Earth Sustainability Solutions Using Space, or the ESUS Coalition. And the reason we did it is because there are so many stakeholders that are interested in harnessing, you know, some of these solutions for these big problems. So if you go to the next slide, starting with the UN. So we all know about the UN sustainability goals. And if you look at these goals, you know, the ones that are outlined in that dark black outline, many of the sustainability goals can be addressed by using space. So anything related to crop and hunger, or good health, or clean water, or climate action, or just ocean health and life below water. You know, so many of these global initiatives and global challenges can be addressed. And we're going to give you some examples. Oh, next slide. I didn't know that shifted like that.
Very good.
Yeah. So Jonathan, why don't, again, you take us through what we've tried to do is highlight, you know, these are just some of those high level sustainability areas. And these are, again, why you would go to low Earth orbit to deal with them.
Sure. So I guess this relates a little bit to the discussion on the different areas in Houston that are important. But again, you're looking at all three phenomena of LEO for sustainability issues. So on water conservation, you're looking at developing water membrane processing technologies. On a remote sensing side, you want to gather a large-scale global data about water usage, water temperature, et cetera. We gave the example of Delta Faucet using microgravity to study droplet formation to conserve water in showers. Other big key areas, climate resilience, so collecting big data on, again, ocean temperatures, emissions, et cetera. That relates obviously to pollution as well. And then also for a key one I'll point out too is plastics. The nice thing about plastics, well, not nice thing, but a thing about LEO and plastics is this really takes advantage of all three phenomena. You can track plastic migration paths because that's a big issue of ocean pollution. You can test plastics and alternative plastic materials in an extreme environment to ensure they can function in an appropriate environment on Earth. And also you can formulate a new alternative material that can be used for packaging to replace plastics with fewer defects. Microgravity produces defects in formulation. So being able to manufacture or at least test a material, make a material with fewer defects in microgravity and in space that could be used on the ground could be a big benefit as well.
And so given all of these, you know, big challenges that we're facing, real global focus all around the world on solving some of these big issues, the purpose of this ESIS coalition is to promote these broad sustainability solutions, starting on the water side. So ocean health, water resource management, crop management, and creating programs focused that could benefit all of the coalition members. And, you know, we've had really great discussions with people like David and others on, you know, what is it about social, corporate social responsibility and sustainability that could bring different types of organizations together. And one of the things that we're trying to focus on with this coalition is, yes, we want to deal with sustainability and corporate social responsibility goals, but we can also create, you know, cutting edge new science and innovation that could directly benefit an organization's business unit goals. And then on the third prong, you know, there could be marketing and goodwill associated with this. So these coalitions really are appealing because we're focused on solving these big problems using space, and we're trying to benefit in a multifaceted way the organizations that are participating. So next slide. What we wanted to do in order to be able to sort of protect that business unit IP that could be developed by participating is create category members. So, you know, if you're a consumer product company, you would only have one as part of this coalition because you would want to maintain that IP that relates to consumer product research and development on, say, water membrane technology as an example. And so these are some of the examples of the category members that we're still recruiting for. So if you're interested, you know, please let us know if you are interested in any of these categories. Next slide. And then there's just the broader coalition partners. So if you're academia or you're an NGO or an industry association or a nonprofit, you're not as focused on protecting your own IP, and you're probably coming in as a broader coalition partner looking at solving those larger challenges. So these are the categories in that type. Next slide. And ultimately, if you do want to get more involved in that, we have lots of examples, as Jonathan mentioned, on how we can use low Earth orbit, either externally on a platform like Bartolomeo to address some of these issues, or internally on the ISS, or even using some of these new space transportation vehicles like Space Forge to come up with these solutions. So we're pretty agnostic in terms of what the platform is, but there's lots of great opportunity now with various different platforms and really harnessing the benefit of low Earth orbit from the microgravity, the extreme condition, and the vantage point to solve some of these big problems. So David, I don't know, over to you if you want to comment on that, or if you want us to go back on anything or open it to question and answer now.
No, this is great. Really, really exciting area. I think everybody on this call has a passion for this, I believe. I think you mentioned the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I would draw people's attention to goal number 17, which is all around partnerships. I think it's recognized by the UN that really to achieve what we need to achieve, we've got to have partnerships, because the size of the challenge is so great. And so this is a great example. That's why I love what you're doing with ESAS, to really pull together that partnership, that coalition, to really address some of these major challenges. And so very excited about that. One wonderful question that I had, and it's sort of related to one that came through on the Q&A here, is can you comment maybe a little bit about the time scale? I think people think that these things take multi-years to actually go from concept through to experimentation in space. Can you comment a little bit about the typical time scale and give us a feel for typically what the cost is and how that is addressed?
Sure. Well, I would say that, right now there are so many different options, channels, we call them, to low Earth orbit. In the past, it was, maybe you go to the ISS through the national lab route. But now you've got the ISS and you've got multiple channels. You've got the national lab route, you've got the NASA commercial allocation, you've got a new Pioneer allocation with commercial service providers. So if you just take the ISS, what once was like a one road highway up is now multiple lanes and multiple options for you to get to the ISS. But the more exciting thing from my perspective is it's not just the ISS anymore. You've got platforms like Space Forge, or some of these other new and upcoming factories in low Earth orbit, where you don't have to wait that period of time to go to the ISS. The cadence for a vehicle like Space Forge is you can go up, and it's a 30 to 60 day cycle time to go up and come back down with a manufactured project or product. So I think things are becoming much more flexible, many more options. The highway is turning from a one road, option to multiple lanes, multiple destinations. We have seen projects, if you're just talking about the ISS, from initial concept to flight be 6 months. You've seen more complex ones be a year or 18 months. But with these new vehicles and new satellite options, you're not going to be talking multiple years. You're going to be talking months. And cost associated with that, I don't want to quote anything specific, but we're talking pricing coming down because of the various options and the various routes. So you're talking, hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars in some cases. And again, it depends on what you're talking about and the complexity.
Yeah, and I think that's the power of the coalition. You know, if you get 8, 10, 12 members, it becomes very manageable, the price tag associated with that. Mark, did you have a question? I know you've connected in here. Or I was going to open it up to anybody else who's got a question that hasn't put it in the chat. If they want to unmute at this time and ask the question directly, please feel free to do so.
I think I might have to unmute you. So if you want to raise your hand, I think there's a little button there, or please, continue to use the question and answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to give a little context, I think when we did our work, Jonathan, I think from initial concept to flight was a little under 2 years, and this was a couple of years ago now, and it's getting a lot.
It's only going to get quicker. And another thing too is with these free flyers now who have a higher launch cadence. You know, if you want to do a follow-on experiment, you don't have to wait a year or two to do another one. You can do a nice cadence of a series of experiments. So you can get maybe 2 or 3 experiments done in the time before you can only do one. So that's another nice thing about.
And David, I missed that softball across the plate, because you're exactly right. The whole purpose of a coalition or the partnerships that TCC promotes, as well as what we're talking about with ESIS, is, say you've got a long-term program that's $2.5 million, but you've got 10 to 20 coalition members that are all supporting that. Your price tag is in a very reasonable operating budget for you as a corporation, as opposed to a long-term capital program. So I think what you just said is, and it's really the underpinning of this whole presentation, is we can come together in partnership through these various vehicles and take advantage of right now what is happening in low Earth orbit with all of these different options, and focus on what are these common big problems that we can all come together and solve, and then benefit our own organizations as well on top of it.
I think we've got one question, Mark. I think you've opened up the mic for Dr. Kamlula.
Hi, good afternoon for a very informative presentation. My question is, can you touch upon international participation in your coalition, or international aspects of it, because there are low Earth orbit providers that are developing in many different parts of, I would say, space ecosystems. So I'd appreciate if you can see how this coalition for sustainability integrates the international aspects.
Yes, that's a great point. And I would say, we Space Commerce Matters work globally. So we're working with NASA, with ESA, with the CNES, the French Space Agency. We're working in Germany and the Netherlands, and with JAXA. And what we're seeing is every space agency across the planet is looking at mechanisms to bring in commercial, non-space agency funding and players into low Earth orbit. Because again, based on those first slides, they want to focus on the moon, Mars, and the exploration agenda. So there's different sort of funding pockets or incentives that various international space agencies are putting in place that could be considered co-funding to some of these initiatives that we're talking about. Just like we could look to NASA for some sponsorship of what we're doing. I would say we have not directly brought in a pure international partner to the coalition yet, but the organizations that are coming in are multinational global companies, which have a presence around the world. So I don't know if that's a convoluted answer to your question. I think, to your point, it is very important for this to succeed that we do think globally, and that we look as not just at all of the platforms and capability internationally, but look at various pockets of funding as support. And also different parts of the world are focused on different parts of sustainability or climate change and have different centers of excellence around that. So it would be great to tap in to all of these, these various centers of excellence globally.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm conscious of everybody's time. I know we're sort of over time, and I apologize for that. I just think there's a huge opportunity here. It's a wonderful opportunity, not just looking at Houston, but globally to actually get involved here, identifying some areas that can really make a difference, that can really leverage the very unique properties that we have access to through science and space. And it has become much more affordable now. So if people are interested, please reach out. Please reach out to either myself or Jonathan or even Cynthia. We'd like to try and pull together some like-minded individuals, corporations that can focus on things that can really make a difference here. Okay. And what I would say, just from our personal experience, that we had a phenomenal experience a couple of years ago. And I always talk about this in terms of creating a space envy across our organization. People wanted to be involved, people wanted to partner, and it was a wonderful experience for everybody who touched that project to actually get to be part of it. It was an incredible experience. If you're looking for ways to drive engagement, I mean, this absolutely drives engagement across an organization. But more than that, it can make a real difference in terms of our trajectory as humans on this planet. So Cynthia, Jonathan, thank you both very much. Excellent. I believe your slides will be made available afterwards.
Yep, that'll be fine. Yep.
So I appreciate that. And again, any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, thanks, Mark, and the whole of the TCC for putting these on. And if you need further information on the TCC, it's a fantastic partnership. And please reach out. We'd love to expand our membership as well. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Cynthia and Jonathan. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.